This aircraft was not merely a bomber. It commenced its existence shrouded in a profoundly fearsome reputation. Monikers such as Widowmaker, the Flying Coffin, and even more ominous titles shadowed its formative years.
I was just petrified when I realized here I was on an air base full of those creatures, and I was going to have to be a pilot in one of them.
At this moment, the authentic narrative of its transformation from perilous hazard to formidable opponent can be unveiled.
It down to rubble. We went twice a day. So we finally knocked it down and killed every German big enough to die.
Following the conclusion of the First World War and the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, the United States resolved to avoid entanglement in global conflicts. For nearly 2 decades, the military capabilities of the United States lagged significantly behind those of an evolving Europe. In Europe, the acknowledgement of air superiority emerged as the fundamental element for achieving success in modern warfare. It was an era marked by significant advancements in technology, characterized by innovative theories and strategies for the emerging class of fighter bombers. By 1933, following Hitler's rise to the position of Chancellor, Germany initiated a rearmament program of significant magnitude. The German war apparatus initiated the process of phasing out its outdated aircraft, embarking on the production of a new class of bombers. Nevertheless, on the other side of the Atlantic, the realm of American aviation continued to be dominated by the spirited endeavors of small-town barnstormers. The American populace remained captivated by visions of triumph, their thoughts drifting towards opulent experiences associated with aviation products rather than the military might of an air force.
America pays too little attention to the rise of Nazism in Europe, and too late does it identify the danger of Japanese expansionism. Now, one of the consequences of all this isolationism is that America had fallen behind in several key military areas, and aircraft was one of these. And on the eve of war, the Americans knew that they had to catch up, and fast.
The United States President Franklin Roosevelt perceived an increasing threat from expanding powers. He initiated responsive measures.
The history on it is that the brass and the Air Force wanted a medium bomber with speed that could more or less defend itself without fighter escort, and was fast enough to evade fighters.
On March 11, 1939, United States officials issued a specific requirement for a new twin-engine medium bomber. The design was to incorporate advanced technology. The technical criteria indicated expectations for contemporary aviation technology. Most importantly of all, the new bomber had to be able to go into production immediately. The winner was a revolutionary twin-engine medium bomber designed by the Glenn L. Martin Company. The new aircraft had been designed by a young team led by a 26-year-old aeronautical engineer. Magruder's radical new design was a sleek, heavily armed aircraft incorporating the latest aeronautical technology, with short wings for high-speed performance. The aircraft had a top speed of 300 miles per hour. With developments in Europe causing increasing alarm, the U.S. Army Air Corps was now under pressure to rearm and needed immediate delivery. Taking an unprecedented step, Martin's design was ordered to go straight from the drawing board into production. There would be no prototype for testing. This unique, off-the-shelf purchase was to sow seeds of disaster in the years to come. Just weeks after the contract was awarded, the expected war in Europe erupted. In a rush, the Army Air Corps ordered additional modifications of extra armor plating, torpedo racks, and a Top Gun turret, all of which substantially increased the weight of the aircraft. But there was no time for any evaluation or testing. The very first of this new generation of warplanes were delivered straight to the U.S. Army Air Corps.
Going out to the flight line and joining with the first pilot, the instructor pilot, was that I was getting into something that would be the most modern that I had envisioned of anything flying up to that point. And so I knew that I was in something different when I first climbed into that cockpit area.
My first impression that compared with what we'd been flying, it was a large aircraft. And I had had no experience in an airplane that size. Also, it looked somewhat formidable with its four-bladed props and its guns in the tail and the guns around the body of the fuselage and a little gun in the navigator's compartment. So it was a forbidding-looking airplane.
However, the Army's changes had also added weight, making Magruder's sleek aircraft a deadly weapon. The new pilots now had to handle the twin-engine bomber with exceptional competence, particularly during takeoffs and landings.
One of the first ones I flew was the 11th airplane off the line. And they were having quite a lot of problems with it. And if I recall, the second day I was there, one of them went in off the end of the runway and exploded. And let's say that got my attention.
I had a feeling that I was trying to learn to fly something that was quite a bit more of an airplane than the trainers I had flown in flying school. And so it was a thrill and also a hint of caution that I'd better handle it very carefully and still be aggressive enough to learn to fly it as well as my instructor.
The new aircraft had a variety of issues due to insufficient testing. The nose wheel struts disintegrated, hydraulic lines leaked, fuel lines became obstructed, and the unproven four-bladed propellers consistently malfunctioned. Compounding the situation, by fall 1941, the defense sector encountered challenges due to material shortages. Aluminum and propellers were just unavailable.
So we would fly an airplane from Baltimore to Barksdale and take the props off and get them back up to Baltimore and do this again and bring airplanes down.
By the conclusion of 1941, the Martin plant successfully fulfilled its first supply of 261 aircraft to the U.S. Air Force. The supply arrived promptly for deployment in the forefront of American forces during the critical period following Pearl Harbor. New pilots were urgently required for war, but within months, this aircraft was demonstrating excessive difficulty in operation, resulting in a concerning frequency of fatal accidents. The B-26 Marauder swiftly acquired the infamous designation of the Widowmaker.
I was just petrified when I realized here I was on an air base full of those creatures, and I was going to have to be a pilot in one of them.
In February 1942, the Martin B-26 Marauder had its inaugural combat in the Pacific War. This was the most sophisticated medium-range bomber globally. Nonetheless, first combat operations were plagued by consecutive disasters. The newly hurriedly taught pilots quickly saw it as a death trap.
Coming right out of flying school and going over to Barksdale Field from Arizona, I really didn't know very much about it except that it was new. But once I got there, I began to hear these stories, and then I kind of wondered what I was getting into.
They called it the Widowmaker, which it made lots of widows. They called it the Baltimore whore, which is a bad word, but that they said it had no visible means of support. And the flying torpedo, they had a lot of bad names for it.
Trainee pilots were struggling to manage the B-26. Trainees would approach the landing at an insufficient speed of 125 miles per hour. It would thereafter halt, rotate uncontrollably.
You had more of a fighter plane feel to that airplane. When you came in for a landing, you didn't just bring it in a nice controlled sliding approach. You brought it in a very steep angle. And then at the very last minute, you would flare it out. And if your timing was right, you would kind of grease it on. If not, you'd splatter it pretty hard. Or if you did it too high, you would hit pretty hard.
Trainees were encountering significant difficulties mastering the operation of the new bomber.
I actually had 10 of them walk in one morning and place their wings on my desk. And they got the choice of being mess officers or going down to Trinidad and flying B-18s on sub-patrol.
We had 5 or 6 pilots that finally gave up flying. They just refused to fly any more combat. And I had unfortunately made a statement to another pilot that I was flying co-pilot for. He was a very ham-handed pilot, and he just he really frightened the daylights out of me the way he flew. So when I got back on the ground after this one mission, I told him, I'm never going to fly combat again if I have to fly with you.
Ground staff had significant difficulties in the maintenance and service of the new aircraft.
We had a lot of tire problems, and if an airplane blew a tire right at liftoff, it usually killed the crew. And sometimes if you came in and the tire was shot up, one tire was shot up and he landed, well, a lot of times it did kill the crew also.
The outcomes were a succession of fatal incidents. By early 1942, over a span of 30 days, 15 B-26 aircraft were deemed total losses due to accidents.
On a day in Tampa Bay, that was the motto. I lost a bunch of friends. They had 7 of us graduate from cadet school at Luke Field. They had us flying fighters out there. And in 6 weeks, out of the 7, me and Pete Graves, only 2 left alive. The other 5 are out there swimming around.
The Committee on Military Affairs, led by Senator Harry Truman, had commenced an investigation into the causes of the numerous casualties. Were Martin's B-26 Marauders a perilous hazard for American aviators? Following 165 accidents and several fatalities among trainee crew members, the Truman Committee advised the cessation of all production and flight operations. However, the Air Force retained confidence in the aircraft and entrusted General James Doolittle, leader of the renowned Tokyo raid in April 1942, with the task of restoring its image.
Jimmy Doolittle, probably the best pilot that we ever had. He had flown air races, and he was a B-26 advocate. He thought it was a good airplane.
He was always someplace flying. He was not a guy that was a desk jockey. And as a result, he was a pilot's pilot.
And he came down and actually landed it on one engine, and he flew around and wrung it out over the top of the airport while all the young pilots were standing there watching it. And they said, Jesus, if he can do that, we can too.
You knew that there was a man that had flown a lot of airplanes and knew what he was doing. And he pushed the limits a little bit because he made tighter turns than the rest of us and scared a little of, but we knew that we had a guy that knew what his limits were.
It would be a critical operation. The research indicated that the primary reasons for the accidents were the inexperience of the pilots and maintenance technicians. In conjunction with the increasing mass of the airframe, to mitigate additional issues with the perilously overloaded aircraft, the engineers implemented a more potent engine and lengthened the wings by 3 feet. This facilitated enhanced control of the aircraft, particularly during takeoffs and landings. Doolittle established a novel training regimen for pilots and technicians. legendary test pilot Vincent Squeak Burnett conducted flying displays to enhance morale and restore confidence in the Marauder.
Here's the checklist, sir. Take a look, Jim. Since you're going to be a B-26 pilot, that's your Bible. Left landing gear and wheel well check. Well, that U-lock the crew member's removing is a safety precaution we have to prevent anyone from raising the landing gear while the ship's on the ground. You don't mean to tell me that's ever happened? That and worse. Now get on with that checklist and see that none of those other things ever happen to you.
You fly her for a while, Jim. Get the feel of the controls. See how easily she handles. Controls are easy, aren't they? Smooth as a GI haircut.
Doolittle's training program had salvaged the B-26 from legislative intervention. However, the stigma associated with the Widowmaker persisted. The Marauder must demonstrate its detractors' fallacies in significant contexts. During warfare, the time had arrived as the B-26 Marauder advanced toward combat in the dunes of North Africa. In November 1942, the 319th B-26 Bomb Group allied with American forces to help Operation Torch, the amphibious invasion in North Africa. Utilizing the new medium bomber for low-altitude ground assault missions might prove catastrophic. Initial missions were characterized by significant organizational disarray.
What happened in Africa that we had no strategy whatsoever. There was no bombing strategy, there was no coordination, there was no photographs, maps of the target. They were hand-drawn maps. In fact, our first flight that went out with 5 planes, none of them come back.
Indeed, our inaugural trip, which departed with 5 aircraft, did not return any of them. The B-26 Marauder crews could execute a formidable assault, releasing up to 4,000 pounds of high-explosive ordnance. The Air Force experimented with novel strategies, including mass squadron formation flying at medium altitude to bomb a singular target for optimal efficacy.
The general routine was you had an initial point, they called it, a specific geographic point on the ground. You would turn then and go to what they call the AP, the aiming point. And as you went toward the aiming point, the bombardier would get his Norden bomb sight, which was an early model of a computer. He would get it organized so that he'd say left, left, right, right, up, up, down, down, whatever, to get the pilot and that computer going together.
The Norden bomb sight stood as one of the most clandestine instruments in the arsenal of the U.S. Air Force. This pioneering machine determined with precision the timing and location for bomb deployment, taking into account factors such as altitude, airspeed, and crosswinds.
And so when you get to your point and you call the pilot and say, okay, I have it, and you go straight and left, and you look in front of you and it looks like thunderclouds. It's black, it's dirty. You feel like, and you almost could, that you could see the Germans at their gun positions.
Then we would go on through. All we could do is just sit there like this because the airplane was being flown by that computer.
It's a moment of truth where everybody has to stop wiggling around trying to evade the flak and wade through. You lean over, and when you do, you go for the eyepiece, and you're watching the crosshairs that are moving. You stop them, and that means you've corrected to the ground speed. And when they get together, the bombs are gone.
The minute he'd say bombs away, then boy, we had our hands on the controls. Sometimes both of us would be, getting it into whatever direction we'd pre-planned for the breakaway.
Time stands still. Trust me, it's a long, long run when it really is probably 3 to 4 minutes, 5 minutes, but it seems a lot longer than that.
The journey to the objective for the crews of the Marauder was fraught with challenges.
Done our job, dropped the bombs. We encountered some flak and some fighters, but my airplane didn't get hit. And we were all assembled and going back to our base.
However, during a particular mission, one of the Marauders sustained damage from flak.
We were supposed to all stay together, and if a guy got crippled, it was his tough luck, but I didn't dare. I didn't want to do that. This guy was out there by himself. He could have been picked off. But I got close enough to be tightened up for defensive purposes. Take a look at him. Well, he was flying straight and level, trying to keep it going, but he had to fly slower because he was crippled. So I had a camera there that we all had, that if something unusual occurred, you could use a camera if you weren't busy fighting off something. And while the other guy flew the airplane, I took this picture myself. I noticed what was wrong. Both engines were moving, but underneath there was a big gash in the left wing. There were holes all along the side of it facing me. This airplane flew all the way back. It must have been about 150 miles or so that he flew back with me on his wing. He couldn't make a normal landing. He made a belly landing. Got those wheels up, skidded in. Nobody was injured inside, but the airplane was really wrecked.
The Marauder demonstrated an impressive resilience to harsh treatment, while simultaneously earning a reputation as a significant source of spare components.
If it hadn't been for airplanes bellying in, we would not have made it. That was our spare parts. Airplanes bellying in, and as soon as we had a crew of people that went over and took parts off the airplane and said, had them put back in storage so we could have them when we needed them.
In terms of belly landings as being a source of a possible crash, nobody really worried about that. We could skid that doggone thing right in, whether it was on mud or on a paved runway or not. And if we had to do it, we'd do it. And in fact, most people would rather make a belly landing than get it up there and bail out and let the airplane fall.
During the initial 3 weeks of their deployment in North Africa, the B-26s belonging to the 319th Bomb Group accomplished a mere 20 missions. At this juncture, the combat losses of the B-26s came under scrutiny. In a matter of weeks, the American troops stationed in North Africa allied with the British 8th Army to confront the formidable German Afrika Korps. The Air Force persisted in its experimentation with the B-26 bombing across various altitudes, ultimately discovering that its optimal effectiveness lay between 10,000 and 12,000 feet, precisely the elevation for which it was initially engineered.
The first 3 or 4 missions, we went from the deck up to about 3,000 to 4,000, 5,000. Still wasn't enough. But very soon we learned that you had to get up above 7,500 feet to be safe from the kind of anti-aircraft, light anti-aircraft flak that they threw up at you. You knew you were going to be attacked coming out of the target area. So you had to get back into tight formation quickly so that your gunners would have the mass effect for the German planes who were coming trying to attack us. They'd like to have us scattered out, pick us off one at a time. And so we didn't want to have that happen.
The B-26 Marauder demonstrated remarkable toughness and durability as an aircraft.
We had them come back with half the tail shot away and engine shot out. And, 26 would absorb a lot of damage.
It just seemed to me like that engine was well built. It would take a lot of beating. We had occasions where engines were shot out. We've been beat up any number of times where you get damage to the plane. There are even occasions where parts of the crews were killed. The plane came back.
The Marauder was rapidly establishing itself as a formidable precision bomber. During the Casablanca Conference in January 1943, Winston Churchill successfully urged Roosevelt to persist with the Mediterranean campaign. Aiming to compel Italy's exit from the war, and divert German forces from the Russian front, thereby laying the groundwork for the impending invasion of France. During the Allied invasion of Italy, Martin's Marauders would contribute to a significant and contentious episode of the Second World War by participating in the Battle of Monte Cassino. By 1943, a shift in strategy from low-level to medium-altitude bombing, coupled with the combat experience gained by the Marauder crews, had ultimately led to a turnaround in fortunes. The Marauders experienced a notable rise in their success during bombing missions, yet the peril of navigating through enemy flak remained a daunting ordeal.
We could look ahead, and I remember saying to the pilot, I nudged him, I said, "What in the hell is that?" He looked at it and he said, "You've seen flak before." I said, "That's flak?" Well, here was this solid black band with red flashes all through it. Well, the Germans had already picked up our altitude, direction, and everything else, so they were just laying a barrage into our flight path. And I don't know how we got through that.
I mean, you can almost walk on this stuff. It's big black puffs. And when you have one where your airplane shudders, that means you done took on some of this stuff.
When you could see flak, then it was reasonably close. When you could hear it, it was very close. When you could smell it or feel it, it was terribly close, within 40 feet of you. Well, that's what we felt all the way through. That black cloud was the aircraft just bouncing, and the smell of cordite or whatever that powder is. We could feel the stuff, we could hear it, we could smell it.
I was there as we were on the bomb run before we got to the target, and we were getting an awful lot of flak. But pieces began to fly off of our lead ship. They were bouncing off of us. And it was a scary experience. I had to try to keep straight and level while we're trying to get down our target. But in doing that, and worrying about the bursts of flak that were coming all around, all of a sudden, we found there was a bump on my head, bang, like somebody hit me with a hammer and knocked my goggles flying and whatever else I had on my head to protect my skull. But just it was a sudden shock, and what had happened was that a piece of flak came right through plexiglass, right straight ahead of me. And of course, if I'd have been done like my grade school teachers used to say, sit up straight, Conlon, I'd have been dead, and I would have gone right through here. Fortunately, I was a little slumped, and it went right through here, grazed the top of my scalp, but it hit hard, drew a lot of blood. It was a shock. It was a surprise. And I knew, I didn't know how bad it was, but I was not unconscious, so I could still function. But I had to get this blood stopped, so that the next thing happened was someone was bandaging me, and the other guy was flying the airplane till we could get back out of this flak. And fighters were now coming in too. I had a whopping headache for the next day, but other than that, I was okay.
The commencement of the Allied invasion of Italy took place in September 1943. In a bid to safeguard the besieged city of Rome, the Germans established a network of defensive lines. The final and most formidable defensive position, the Gustav Line, was anchored on the heavily fortified garrison town of Cassino.
Strategically, Monte Cassino is absolutely pivotal. It's a formidably strong mountainous area right in the middle of the Gustav Line, which protects the direct route for the Allies to take Rome. Now, what had happened in early 1944 is that not only had a direct assault on the Gustav Line failed, but the Allies had tried to get round it by going to Anzio, and that also had stalled. So one way or the other, they were going to have to solve the problem of Monte Cassino.
The revered monastery of Monte Cassino remained unscathed. This monastery, established in the 5th century by St. Benedict, gained international acclaim as a center of sanctity, culture, and artistic expression. However, the Allies harbored suspicions that it served as the stronghold for the German defenders. In a decision that sparked considerable debate, an order was issued for its destruction.
And of course, all the Catholic people and all were all totally freaked out because you ain't supposed to do that. You know, it's a shrine. Well, it ain't no shrine if the Germans are in there with machine guns killing our boys.
Gentlemen, we all know the purpose of this operation against Cassino.
Timing works like this, sir. The attack will be opened by medium bombers, beginning with the B-25s, the Tactical Air Force. Then come the heavies in waves of 15-minute intervals. Following the heavies, the B-26s will complete the attack.
And during the briefing there, as I say, we had a Catholic chaplain get up and asked if any Catholic present, and there were some, you know, in every group. And the next question was, do you want to go? And if you don't want to, you don't have to. Yeah, but the Pope said, give them hell. So we did.
The sky was full of every kind of aircraft that I knew of in the whole Southern European theater. The B-17s, B-24s, the P-47 dive bombers, the Spitfires that we had covering us, the P-51s that had just come in. Everything was in the air.
The Germans had established a strong defensive position, and as the group of marauders neared Monte Cassino, the skies erupted with the fire from the German artillery.
We're getting shot up pretty good, but you see, the pilot, he don't see a lot. In other words, he goes up there on the lead ship. Now, he flies the airplane up to this bomb run, and at that point, this northern bomb site takes over.
Well, I remember seeing the casino. It was a white building sitting up there. To me, it looked like a white picket fence, you know, around it. And we made our bomb run, and as we was making our bomb run, we came in and we dropped our bombs, and I could see them exploding from one end to the other of the casino, and nothing but dust underneath there.
On February 15, 1944, the world was taken aback as the monastery was reduced to rubble. The precision of the B-26's bombing unequivocally demonstrated that, when utilized correctly, Martin's aircraft served as a formidable instrument of warfare. This moment marked a significant shift for the Marauder.
It was solid stone, you know. Them friars built a heck of a shrine. The walls on that thing were 6-8 foot thick.
The bombing of Monte Cassino was a tragedy. Ironically, the bombing itself worked reasonably well. The B-26s did a good job, the bombing was quite accurate, and the monastery itself was leveled. The Germans then occupied the ruins, and the Allies simply weren't able to get them out of the ruins. Thus, although the bombing worked in the short term, the Allied operation to smash a hole through the Gustav line failed.
The advent of the Norden bomb site, coupled with the caliber of munitions it could deploy and the aircraft's velocity and maneuverability, coalesced to create a truly formidable apparatus. The Marauder was now capable of deploying bombs at the mere push of a button. In the aftermath of the Mediterranean campaign and the collapse of Rome, the B-26 Marauder and its crew garnered a reputation marked by a succession of victories. Notwithstanding its infamous inception as the flying coffin, the Marauder was demonstrating itself to be an exceptional aircraft and a formidable opponent. The enhanced precision of bombing and the transition to medium altitude strategies signified that the Marauder had truly established its significance. The events of D-Day would present the Marauders with a series of formidable challenges. The B-26s were summoned to weaken the adversary through a vigorous pre-landing bombardment. They were instrumental in disrupting German troop movements, communications, and defenses. During the Allied invasion of southern France, the B-26s played a crucial role in neutralizing the heavily fortified ports of Bordeaux and Toulon. Designated as a stronghold by Hitler, the port of Toulon was heavily fortified with numerous shore batteries and anti-aircraft guns. Should the harbor fall into enemy hands, it was imperative that the artillery be rendered inoperative.
From 10 to 11,000 feet, we could put 90% of the bombs in a 600-foot circle. We could hit the target, we could defend ourselves, and hit it and get back.
Across 48 distinct missions, with a mere loss of 8 aircraft, the Marauders unleashed one of the most intense barrages of the conflict. At no previous time had the Marauder's skill as a precision bomber demonstrated such remarkable efficacy. On the date of August 23, 1944, Toulon succumbed. The campaign led by the Allies progressed effectively through the territories of occupied France, culminating in the liberation of Paris by August 1944. At this juncture, as Germany faltered, the Marauders were dispatched to target enemy defensive positions along the eastern banks of the Rhine. The medium bombers were particularly effective in dismantling the enemy's road and rail infrastructures. During the concluding months of the conflict in Europe, the resilient B-26 crews undertook an unprecedented number of missions, frequently facing intense assaults. The once criticized medium bomber had now earned a reputation for its ability to enter the fray and deliver strikes with remarkable precision. The Marauder garnered admiration from its crew for its formidable strength and capacity to endure intense punishment. As the conflict drew to a close, during a bombing raid over the Rhine, B-26 bombardier Charles News encountered an unforgettable experience.
We were just 20 miles or so from Strasbourg, and we took a hit. Then the next hit, we got, I think, was in the Bombay. And at that point, we realized that we were hit. We were not going to make it. It was chaotic. You know, neither engine was doing what it was supposed to do. We had fire. I could see the fire. You know, there was no mystery about it. The co-pilot was sitting, trying to get out, which he couldn't, but his parachute strap had caught on the seat. The release to the co-pilot's seat was between the pedals. I could reach it. I did reach it. I pulled her sideways, and he went backwards.
Following the successful deployment of the co-pilot, News managed to extricate himself from the bombardier's position.
So we got the co-pilot. He was the first one out. We got him through.
The gunner stationed in the upper turret had met his demise. The tail gunner and radio gunner executed their daring escape, ejecting past the landing gear, thereby leaving only News and the pilot.
We were trying to debate whether or not we would stay with the plane because we could see the Rhine River and we could see safety and home. We finally got to the point saying, no, we're gonna take the way out, and out we went. I remember the tremendous quiet as you're hanging on a parachute, swinging gently in the breeze, you hope, and everybody's gone, everybody's left you. I was not heroic. I knew when I was caught, and I stopped and promptly showed my hands and stood still, and so then it was taken prisoner.
In May 1945, the triumph over Nazi Germany was fully realized. By the conclusion of the conflict, the documentation of Marauders was remarkable. The precision of its bombing played a crucial role in securing victory in the European theater of the conflict. The B-26 has etched its name in the annals of aviation with a remarkable record of endurance. The actual combat losses sustained were lower than those of any other Allied bombers throughout the conflict. Haunted by its infamous legacy as a harbinger of doom from inception to demise, This extraordinary aircraft was sorrowfully interred without the ceremonial recognition it so rightfully earned. In the waning days of autumn 1945, following the conclusion of the war, the remaining fleet of 500 B-26s met their end as they were dismantled and destroyed for scrap in Germany.
I would say that considering its birth, when it came out and how many people it killed, it was a bad airplane. Now, as we learned to fly it and as the mechanics learned to maintain it, it became a good airplane.
You'd have holes all over the airplane and still it was flying. Come home on one engine, fly almost the whole distance on it. And that was a pleasant surprise. And so that we kind of loved that airplane after seeing what it did for us in so many missions.
That was probably one of the greatest aircraft that we ever had in the military in those days, in terms of its ability to take a terrible, terrible beating. And that was one thing that made it tenable for us to fly that airplane and keep on flying it, because we knew that sucker would bring us back. You know, it might be hard getting back, but it would get us back.
Well, of course, coming right out of flying school and going over to Barksdale Field from Arizona, I really didn't know very much about it except that it was new. But once I got there, I began to hear these stories, and then I kind of wondered what I was getting into. But nevertheless, it was a challenge, and I listened, but some of the stories described it as a widowmaker, a flying prostitute, no visible means of support, and several other less flattering terms. One a day in Tampa Bay, and that sort of thing. So it was a little daunting, but that was the problem that we had to overcome to be sure that any of us that were going to learn to fly it and later go into combat would have to put that aside if we're going to be successful. And so we made a go at that. Some didn't do so well with that, and a few quit along the way. But most of us did go with it and learned well enough to fly that airplane. And one thing we learned as we were going along is that either you fly it or it'll fly you.